moment, another open to the cameras moment in the Oval Office, meeting with the South African president, President Trump there. A very open conversation. At one point, the president's staff playing out a video showing these claims of genocide in South Africa, which its leader has refuted. An amazing moment, Trace, and welcome everybody. I'm Sandra Smith in New York.
It's been 35 years since the transition, and I know there's a lot of anger, through the transition. There's also a lot of stuff happening in the apartheid days. We grew up in the apartheid era, but I don't think two wrongs makes a right. President Mandela, when he came out of prison for all that time, didn't come out with hatred, and really unified our nation through sport. We've got a great ally we can have, the US. It's always been an ally of South Africa for a very long time, even in the days of the war, up in Angola. You guys helped us. So very important for us to have your support and get the change we need.
Where did you do that well?
He might have done that even better than he plays golf, which is almost impossible.
Good day. Welcome to this production of Places of Valour. This is about a war in Angola. Here, the largest land battles, the Cold War, was fought during 1966 to 1989. It expanded over 23 years when two generations of soldiers took place. It involved South Africa, Namibia, Angola, Zambia and Zimbabwe. Also the superpowers, Soviet Union, USA and also Cuba was involved. It almost led to the destruction of a major country, Angola, and it was the start of the liberation struggle for Angola. So this documentary will take you on a journey through the major places where the war took place in Angola. We will visit major sites, and we have participants of the war who will tell their stories and even share their thoughts on how the war was fought.
They asked South Africa, please, we need to help you. Not because South Africa is bad about it. We have family asked South Africa to help us. And South Africa was here, our house was burned. And they come to help us.
I'd like to say to the PW Botha, Mr. President, we've got a new addition to South Africa. It's called Angola. It's all yours.
So they had no cover. They were shot to pieces. I could hear them shouting on the radios, the commanders asking for help. And Colonel Ferreira just said, carry on with the attack, carry on with the attack. So out of 240 men, to have 45 down is a high percentage. To tell you that our romantic view of battle had just disappeared. It wasn't nice anymore.
So Protea was a class of its own, and I reckon in history Protea will stand out as one of the major successes of semi-conventional and conventional war.
To attack them with artillery, to do a big bombardment, and it was one of the biggest bombardments of the war until such stage that the war actually ended.
I'm very excited to commence this journey and share this wonderful story with you. So, let the journey begin. So why I'm sitting here with a lovely river behind me having this discussion? Well, I found myself in the little, not so little anymore, town called Rundu in the northeast of Namibia. And we are set to do a very promising tour where we're going to have the privilege to visit a number of familiar battlefields where the South African Border War, it's a war between 1966 and 1989, took place. So, why is it significant to start my journey at this spot? Well, you see there in the background the beautiful, crystal clean Okavango River. The river that starts deep into Angola and then it enters and forms the border at some point. And to the west of this river, major land battles took place where the African Defence Force and two opposing forces, FAPLA, Angola's military force, and Southwest African People's Organization, SWAPO, took place. So, as you can see, on the other side of the river, just up there, is the territory of Angola. It's a sovereign country. It became independent in 1975. The war only ended as late as 1988, and the rebel movement were only finally defeated in 1992. So why is this war so significant? Why did it take so long? It's important for historians to dig into a story, to try and understand the war, and to make sense of what happened. I myself, a veteran of the war, where I served at 3rd Battalion in 1983, have a bit of insight and ability to understand how a number of things fit in. But my knowledge is limited to the abundance of sources that's available, oral evidence of many, many veterans. Some of them we can meet this week will tell their stories. But during this episodes, we're probably going to visit 17 major places where major battlefields took place, and there were harsh battles were fought. And it seems promising to be able to stand at significant places like Cuito, Cuanavale, Menogue, towns like Cassinga, Cuvelai, Ivali, Mupa, Ondjiva, Xangongo. These are all familiar names if you have a bit of background about the war. So we're looking forward to the trip and looking forward to share the stories as we continue. We're here on the lovely shores of the Xangongo River, upstream from Rundu. Today we're going to access Angola through the Cuito border post, and then the wonderful journey starts. So what this is about, we can refer to this as following in the footprints of Colonel Jan Breitenbach. In September, October 1975, he, with his men, that stage referred to as Bravo Group, but later became the famous 3rd Battalion, they started the journey up the Xangongo River and followed the long course through the Kunene province, having different conflicts at places like Cuvelai, Ivali. They attacked and taken Ondjiva, and then on their way to Xangongo. And that was the start of the famous Operation Savannah. So we're privileged to follow in his footsteps and go to familiar places from where we will share many stories. Thank you. I'm very privileged to stand here next to the tarred runway, close to Savate, the scene of one of the most fearsome battles of Angolan Border War, where 3rd Battalion had huge success and probably had the most losses during the war. We arrived here with a group of more than 40 people, all mostly veterans, and people that come here today to contribute and pay homage to their fallen soldiers. It's a day that will be remembered in history as a significant day, a historic day, but also a sad day for those who lost their loved ones. We are privileged to travel all the way from South Africa to get here, and today is a special day, especially for the survivors, for people who participated. Many of them are present here today.
Minute. bakkie oor toe. Wat? Stand at ease.
Dankie, ek weet. We are here not to forget the men that paid the highest price here. We are here to honor them. And I think in their honor, I want to read that Psalm 144 in die nagedagtenis van die 3 manne wat hier so dapper gesneeuwel het.
I'm here on location on the Tart runway near Savate in Angola. We commemorate the 21st of May 1980. Today, Infantry Battalion under command of Commandant Dion Falcon Ferreira led a small infantry force of only 3 companies launched an attack and captured the brigade-strong Fapla base at Savate during Operation Trio Trio. Infantry Battalion would take it on under the guise of a UNITA force. The battalion was to engage Fapla at Savate without the aid of the SADF usual artillery or the usual participation of a gunship South African Air Force helicopters. Operation entailed rifle companies Alpha Charlie and Foxtrot, 2 mortar groups who attacked the base from the south and the west, while some 3 Battalion recce team members served as stopper groups who inflicted the final blow on fleeing Fapla soldiers who fled to the north. 2 platoons from Charlie Company were to attack a vehicle park 500 meters from the town on the edge of an airstrip. Foxtrot Company was to attack the area south of the base. The 3rd platoon from Charlie Company was kept in the reserve but got involved in the main force. It was joined by another platoon who was to follow behind the main force in a spread out line to tend to and evacuate wounded South African soldiers. The SADF force received orders for attack at 10 o'clock on the 21st of May and immediately attracted heavy fire from a range of different weapons from enemy positions. The most fearsome were the 122mm Grad P Techipa rockets, which were fired from single launches. Fapla soldiers had been evacuating the base by boarding an estimated 12 trucks, which were encircled by an infantry company, which accompanied the vehicles on foot in a box formation. They ran directly into the line of the stopper groups and the Ferreira had formed, which began firing on them while they alighted the relief from the vehicles. The SADF force augmented its convoy with 19 captured East German IFA trucks and 2 fuel bunkers. 24 enemy vehicles were destroyed, including an amphibious platoon which was still on location a few years ago, although 3 Battalion had succeeded in capturing Savate. The operation exacted a heavy toll of 15 casualties and 25 more soldiers were wounded. Consequently, the day is the greatest military success, could arguably also be known as the darkest day of the history of 3 Battalion. It was reported from intercepted messages that 558 Fapla soldiers had been killed, wounded, or gone missing.
The volume of fire started small. It was in individual snaps from the forward positions, and we thought, okay, maybe they vacated the base. But as we approached the trenches, it intensified to one blanket of noise. Machine guns, mortars being fired. They were firing over our heads with the 82mm mortars, probably more in the direction of the headquarters. It was too close to engage us, and then the rockets mainly were aimed at our mortar group in the south. And then on the left-hand flank, those heavy machine guns, they sound like paper tearing, like a sheet tearing when an anti-aircraft gun with 2 or 4 barrels open up. And they just ran away. We shot a few, but then we realized we are not at the main defensive position yet. So we were almost out of ammunition some 30 minutes later when we hit the trenches. By that time, my platoon sergeant, Coetzee Engelbrecht Corporal, had been wounded, and somebody had indicated to me that the corporal had been shot. I designated somebody to look after him, and we carried on, because the drill is you finish the attack and then you roll back. So it was an intense attack for Foxtrot Company on the south of the road, but the two other companies were taking serious flak, because they were attacking in the north and they had to cross the runway. And that was defended by 14.5 and 23mm anti-aircraft guns in the ground roll, which was devastating. Around the base it was barren. There were high trees, but there was no low cover. It was sand. So they had no cover. They were shot to pieces. I could hear them shouting on the radios, the commanders asking for help. And Colonel Ferreira just said, carry on with the attack, carry on with the attack. So by the time we were preparing to take the trenches, my platoon had run out of ammunition, all but. And I looked at Jim Ross, the company commander, and I said, Chief, what now? And he just gave me the hand sign to say, stand up, advance. So we basically took the trenches at that time without too much ammunition. A few rounds here and there. The machine guns were empty, the 60mm were empty. So luckily at that time, I think the enemy realized, these guys must be mad, because they actually started withdrawing to the north. And we were quite happy by just after 10 in the morning, 2 hours into the contact, that we had taken the trenches. But soon we realized the enemy did not run away. They actually circled around to the north, and soon by 11:30 we found ourselves defending the base against the counterattack. Charlie and Alpha Company had taken serious losses. They were really in a bad position. So Foxtrot fought through the trenches, and then we defended the base and did an assault on the enemy that was attacking us. And then they finally broke off by lunchtime and they fled to the north. They started. We didn't obviously sleep that night. People were demoralized. The people from the soldiers from Rhodesia that had come out and joined us at that stage told us that they'd never seen anything like this. They said the colonel was mad and this was a suicide battalion. You couldn't attack against the brigade with a battalion minus. In any case, it had happened back, and the colonel said, the convoy is going to leave us. We must go back, take a few hours and see if we can recover the corporal with the signaller and then also the captain. And I think the adrenaline was then flowing freely. So we rushed back to the dispersal point, parked the vehicle there and split up in two groups, one to the north and one to the south. The group on the north soon found Captain Mulder, where he had been shot in a trench. As we entered the base, recovered him, and minutes later we found the signaller, but no sign of the corporal. As we picked up the signaller corporal who had been shot to pieces with a PKM machine gun, we realized that in his last act of bravery he had buried the corporal, who was still alive, just a leg wound, underneath him in the sand, with a ground cover over him, a ground sheet over him, and he had taken position with both their weapons on top of him and defended. When the enemy came with a counter-attack, they shot him to pieces and the corporal under him, but not realizing that there was a South African soldier on the ground in that hole. So we recovered those two bodies and the captain, and very soon we caught up with the rest of the convoy. Our enemy, the official enemy, was SWAPO, the South-West Africa People's Organization, the insurgency to liberate Namibia, South-West Africa at the time. We were not supposed to engage FAPLA. We were not in official war with the Angolans. However, they were very much intertwined. FAPLA would provide staging posts for SWAPO to get logistically supplied, and from then to advance into Southwest Africa for attacks on military bases, on towns, ambush. sabotage missions on telephone infrastructure and roads. So they were intermingled. So in our view as juniors, they were one and the same. It was one enemy. However, FAPLA was a conventional force that had come through the 75 war against South Africa. They had tanks, artillery, they were well trained. SWAPO were the insurgents. So you're actually supposed to hold ground, but remember, South Africa would go in, the United Nations would criticize South Africa, we'd say we are not in Angola. Then we would withdraw, hoping that they had learned their lesson and they wouldn't use that route for a while, etc., etc. But we never held terrain in Angola. So that's not actually the way to conduct a war. So it was just, they incurred a lot of losses in the process, and we hoped that at some stage it would deter them from launching attacks, because definitely months after the Savate attack, I don't think there was any SWAPO action into that part of Southwest Africa. So if we achieve that, good for it.
Today we're at Menogue. I'm right next to the Menogue runway and the airport. Very, very significant place where most of FAPLA's military fences and aircraft, the famous MiG-23, operated. So this is an interesting place, a very, very important place during the Angolan Border War. And we can later share stories about our special forces that were actively involved here. Today our story comes from the location where we're at Cuito. The story that during the final phase of the war, where SADF established its headquarters, which was situated at Mavinga, from where semi-conventional battles were conducted against the combined FAPLA and Cuban force. The military objective of FAPLA during 1986, with the backing of Cuban forces, which were based at Cuito, was to capture Mavinga and then went to Jamba in the southeastern corner of Angola, both of which were controlled by UNITA. Conversely, the objective of UNITA, with the support of SADF, was to defend Mavinga, prevent it from falling into the hands of FAPLA and Cuban forces. Mavinga was approximately 120 kilometers southeast of Cuito, and Jamba is further south. The Angolan MPLA government made several attempts to consolidate its rule through Angola, including the areas which UNITA controlled in the southeast. By contrast, the SADF was intended on ensuring that southeastern Angola did not fall in Fapla, hence and even of an UNITA defeat controlled by Fapla of a Cuanavale province would have facilitated not only the crossing of planned guerrillas of SWAPO into Namibia, but also enabled the Nkonto Sizwe guerrillas of South African National Congress to follow the same route and enter Botswana through Xangongo and the Caprivi, and subsequently to infiltrate into South Africa itself. It's more appropriate to refer to the operations in Cuanavale province of Angola as the Battle for Mavinga and not at Cuito. Cuito was an insignificant village on the banks of the Cuito River. It's approximately 400 kilometers from the Namibian border. The stated objective of Fapla and Cuban force in its campaign to take control of Mavinga and Jamba campaigns were 1. To occupy the UNITA-held town of Mavinga and then to proceed to Jamba. 2. Weaken UNITA by destroying its main base at Jamba. 3. To open up the border between South Africa, Namibia and Angola in the northeast to enable SWAPO guerrillas to infiltrate into Xangongo and Caprivi regions. It failed to achieve any of these objectives. Conversely, the objectives of the SADF and UNITA joint forces were 1. To halt and reverse the Fapla and Cuban advance on Mavinga and Jamba. 2. To inflict maximum casualties on retreating Fapla and Cuban forces. And 3. To force Fapla and Cuban troops to retreat to the west of the Cuito River. The combined SADF and UNITA force achieved all 3 of these objectives. August in 87, during the second semi-conventional battles, the combined Fapla and Cuban forces for the next offensive comprised of Fapla's 8, 13, 16, 21, 25, 47, 57 and 66 brigades and the 50th Cuban Brigade. The SADF launched Operation Modeler, followed by Hooper and Packer. Finale and Cuban advance to Mavinga was stopped at the Lomba River, and Fapla troops were obliged to retreat back 120 kilometers to the western side of the Cuito River, after which the SADF forces destroyed the bridge to ensure that neither Fapla nor Cuban forces would be able to cross to the eastern side for a considerable period after the SADF force had departed. The defeat of Fapla and Cuban forces was also a nightmare for Arnaldo Thomas Ocha Sanzes El Moro, who had commanded the Cuban forces in Angola since November of 1987. He complained that he had been given the responsibility of deciding over a, quote, last war, end quote, to ensure that he will be blamed for, quote, the defeat, end quote. General Ocha did in fact become the scapegoat. He was executed on 13 July 1989 on instructions of President Castro. Because of serious corruption
dishonest use of economic resources, and drug trafficking. He took the fall for the Cuban defeat in Angola. Subsequently, it had been sugar-coated and presented as gullible international politics as the victor of Cuito.
The much vaunted Battle of Cuito was over by the middle of 1988, although both sides suffered losses. Of those of Vapla and the Cuban contingent were disproportionately immense, as the following summary reveals. One entire Vapla brigade, the 47th Brigade, was effectively annihilated. 4,486 Vapla soldiers were killed. 94 Vapla tanks were either destroyed or rendered and handed over to the UNITA. 8 MiG-23 and 4 MiG-21 jet fighters were shot down. By contrast, on the SADF and UNITA side, 1,000 UNITA soldiers were killed, 31 SADF soldiers were killed, 3 elephant tanks were either destroyed or captured, a total of 11 armored cars and armored personnel carriers were destroyed, including 4 Rattles, and 1 Mirage of Everett, the jet fighter, was shot down.
You have a good privilege to ask me, because I and the Lieutenant de Force, Delta Company, was the first platoon after Second World War to driving in on wall and tops of the tanks. We never trained on tanks. And remember, we walk in top of the tank. When you see the enemy, you give the target for your gunner, and they close themselves on top, because the guys don't see. But you give it at 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Luckily, my gunner maybe was 18 years old. The chap. When the target to give my friend, the guy was on target. Actually we learn and use it. But we support UNITA, but to defend ourselves, we never work same together with UNITA because they are different trend.
It is immediately apparent from the figures that the SADF and UNITA forces inflicted far greater losses with respect to personnel and equipment than they suffered. The Angolan Border War was not to be concluded through military means. Representatives of the political leadership of opposing parties held explanatory discussions, which finally resulted in a peace treaty which was signed on 22 December 1988 at the headquarters of the United Nations in New York City, which was subsequently ratified by the Security Council.
Talking about the Battle of Indungo, Operation Firewood was the last operation when the SADF force fought inside a SWAPO base during the war. Operation Firewood was carried out on 31st October 1987 against the SWAPO Central Area headquarters and various detachments at the small village of Indungo. The objectives of the SADF were to eliminate the bases of SWAPO, to cut off logistical supply lines, by doing so to prevent infiltration by SWAPO into Namibia. The SADF was to field its best trained military formations for Operation Firewood, namely South African Special Forces units from its reconnaissance regiments, the Rickies, its 1st Parachute Battalion, and companies from the Ovambo 101 Battalion. The task force for Operation Firewood was equipped with 4 Ratel armoured vehicles, each fitted with an 81mm mortar pipe, a number of Casper armored vehicles, and the familiar Buffalo mine protected vehicle. The task force was under command of Colonel James Hills, comprised of a total of 1,071 soldiers, which is generally considered to constitute a battalion strength force. Attacked by the Rakis, the Parabats was preceded by an SAF Air Force bombardment at 8 hours at 1200 hours. The plan for the attack by the main task force entailed a force attacking with tremendous force, while chaos still prevailed at the target area in the aftermath of the airstrike. The fierce resistance which the task force encountered from SWAPO resulted in one of the most bitterly contested battles many of the SADF soldiers could recall. After some fierce fighting, the soldiers were able to drive the enemy away as the SWAPO soldiers fled the target area. At this point, the narrative now turns to the role which the companies of 101 Battalion played during the attack, which was mainly as stopper groups, whose details have been gleaned mainly from an operational report by Commandant Kruger. They formed a cordon around the target area. SWAPO set 2 well-prepared ambushes for these men.
So our convoy approached the Indungo area from the north. We passed on this road over the first so-called Shona, or little river. It looks more like a pond. There is a stormwater pipe underneath the road. The probable location where the northern stopper groups of 101 Battalion was positioned to fend off any threat from the north. We are on the northern side of operation, so it was important to stop the traffic coming from the north at this junction. So there was a stopper group from 101 Battalion protecting this area just to stop people coming from the north. This, like I said, was a Shona. Your guy said it's a Ramba. It opens up all the way to the east, and here, call sign 20, Radius Rabbi was the commander of that one, with 16 Caspers. They drove up and down this, up and down, in spread out formation, and there is narrow. They had to go into a single file, where they have to follow single file. Right here, they follow in a single file. SWAPO hit them in the ambush with everything. Anti-tank, RPG-7s, and they hit them just over there. Very, very hard. Well, perhaps just a bit further, because the base was 3 kilometers from this road, so it could be further than this. And then they got hit. The troops panicked. 16 Caspers, 10 troops per Casper, 160 possible troops. They all started running. Now they're shit, and they know there's a fight going on. They hear what's going on. Rademeyer had no support, no artillery, nothing. So what happens? The other reaction force, they call themselves reaction force, started to join in to try and come and rescue them. So they arrived one by one, and as they arrived, they got hit. So the next shit happens. And again, they say it was so intense for fighting that some of the Caspers squashed some of the SWAPOs against ant hills just to start killing some of them. Some of our SWAPOs in the drive jumped on the Caspers with hand grenades, ready to chuck it within the Caspers. That's how close the battle was. Not succeed, not one Casper. So, guys who were killed, direct hits from either B-10 or RPG-7s, some right through the windshield. So what happened here is they had to leave behind 3 Caspers because of a fight. It was late, it was already, the fight started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The base attack was 12 o'clock. So it happened quite late in the operation. And late at night, it was getting dark. We had to start rescuing these vehicles. Remember, 16 vehicles, all hit. The tires are flat. We have to now rescue these vehicles. We have to start recovering, a hell of a job. So at the end, I can show you a photograph. There were 2 fully burnt out Caspers, with 1 soldier still inside, never recovered. And a fully intact Casper was standing there. Caspers. Talking about rattles, they had 4 rattles, 81mm rattles, which were supposed to start firing when the operation started. But one of the charges on the floor set alight, and the rattles started burning. And they couldn't fire. One guy, 60% burns on his body. He had been rescued. So this location is the furthest north that a proper company type of operation took place at attack. I'm not talking about Savannah. I'm talking about the middle of the war, number 1. Number 2, the most casualties in a single day in the operation, 15 dead, 6 parabats, 1 special force guy, and the rest are 101. And the third thing, it was the last time in the whole war that the unit attacked the SWAPO base and entered the target and then left. So all these things accumulated, and the story was put under the covers for very, very long, for various reasons. But I think the Rakis and the Parabats did a tremendous job. They did exactly what they were told. I think 101, the planning of the operation was not that good. The base would probably be behind me, 5 kilometers from this main road. There was a T-junction with an access road heading towards the base where all this action took place.
Anyway, I was on my own then. Chris, we were a group of 3 Caspers that was protecting the log element and the whole echelon. And then we got tasked to go away to assist the parachute battalion, the reconnaissance with casualties and people that died. Yes, there was 2 fumes of smoke. Large smoke where you can see where Caspers got fire was hit and they were burning. And then I took Bertus and I took him out of the underneath the fire. Put the fire out because his bottom limbs were burning. And then loaded him into a blanket and into Lieutenant Dassenville. He and Snyman was there. The rest of his company was gone, but Snyman and Dassenville was there, and I put them there, put the body in there. He had dog tags on, which I took off, just to give you the heat of that tire. It was so hot that when I put my hands between his bulletproof jacket and his shoulders, which was fully intact, it burned my hands. And I took the dog tags off. It burned my fingers, the white line on my fingers, the dog tag. That's how hot it was under that position that he was lying. I did not see the second one, the second plume. I saw it from a distance, but I did not go there. That was the Casper that was burning where Rademacher was killed. That's it. Anything more?
After the battle died down, 3 destroyed Caspers and a Buffalo mine protected armored vehicle were not recovered. SWAPO casualties as being categorized as called heavy losses, but were estimated between 100 and 150 were killed. An official SADF medical report sets the final number of SADF soldiers who were wounded at 56 and 15 soldiers died that day. These were arguably the highest number of casualties the SADF suffered the entire war on one particular day.
Cassinga was to be the site of an airborne assault by the SADF and one of 3 targets of Operation Reindeer on 4 May 1978. SWAPO had a large base at Cassinga, which served as a main logistical training, rest and evacuation center. 3 main targets who were to be attacked during the carrying out of Operation Reindeer. Phase 1 was to take the form of an airborne attack by 44 Parachute Brigade on target Alpha at Cassinga, some 250 kilometers north of the cat line. The airborne battalion was to be led by Colonel J.D. Jan Breitenbach. The bulk of the paratroopers did not land between the town and the western bank of the Kalonga River, according to plan, but instead were scattered over a wide area on the west bank of the river. The first SADF group arrived at the target from the north and neutralized the entire guerrilla section. By this time, the H-hour to commence the attack had already been delayed by an hour. The line of attack was on an axis which ran south-north and no longer west-east. Breitenbach formed up in the middle with Alpha Company to his left, Bravo Company to his right, for the assault by his main force. An enemy BTR 152 open-topped armored personnel carrier with a force of in the region of 40 soldiers on board arrived from the south of Cassinga as part of a retaliation attack on the SADF. Several enemy T-34, 85 tanks accompanied by from 20 to 30 BTRs and some BRDM-2 amphibious armed cars also formed a wide front as the vehicles approached Cassinga. The vanguard was followed by 12 trucks, each carrying from 200 to 240 troops and towing a 14.5mm guns. Breitenbach immediately requested air support, which was provided by Buccaneer and 2 Mirage fighter aircraft. When Breitenbach assembled a force which comprised of a remainder of Alpha Company, the anti-tank platoon, some of the wounded, and General C.L. Constant Viljoen, the then chief of the SADF, at a location close to a cemetery. Charlie Company covered their rear. When the SAF contingent arrived, the Mirages attacked the BTRs, with Buccaneers neutralized the 5 tanks in the mechanized column. Soon the fighting was finally over. From reports which were obtained from intercepted messages, it was learned that the bodies of 603 dead SWAPOs were counted. 4 SADF soldiers died during the engagement and 12 were wounded. 1 soldier was lost and is still to death. We went past Cassinga today, where the site where the attack took place, the remainder buildings, is now part of an open-air museum, which is perhaps accessible to the public. But we didn't have time to remain there. We did find the signpost of Cassinga, and obviously the lane of tall trees that is always very recognizable of any photographs from the area.
You were leading the Cassinga ops.
Battle of Cassinga, yeah.
Battle of Cassinga. Reindeer.
Yeah.
They were Buccaneers and Mirages softened the target before you did that airborne assault.
Yes.
How effective would you say was the Air Force bombardment, especially in that sandy soil which took the impact? I mean, it's you have a huge crater, but that's about all you have.
Yeah, all they did was is provide cover for the enemy to go into. Yes. Yeah, no, they weren't very effective, but I suppose it's psychological. Because these aeroplanes are attacking them shooting the guns at them and so on and so forth. That is, softening up the target, that sort of thing, you see. And then, we jumped in, of course, and we followed that one very quickly before they could recover from the fright. It is impressive to have the mirages coming shooting at you, see, and so forth. And then here come the paratroopers. You must always add the combat power of all these things together. And what is more, you mustn't let a certain section of combat power die down before you launch the next section, as it were, because they follow each other very rapidly. In other words, the mirages come in, they bomb and shoot the hell out of the target area, and immediately after that, here come the paratroopers, jump on C-130s, C-160s, when they're still frightened the hell out of them because these airplanes are gone. And look at that, there are the parachutes. So that you go put in that. Let the other paratroopers jump onto objective. It's not just other paratroopers jumping onto objective for the enemy. They can see all these parachutes. They obviously about 300, 400, 500 of them. And here they come, and then now they're going to have a rough time. So they're demoralized.
That's
the effect of the rifles, at least of the air bombardment or whatever, may not be as well as you would like it to be. You see, I mean, you're not killing very many with that.
No, you don't kill many, but you obviously this has a ecological part of it.
I find myself just about 60 kilometers south of the town of Cuvelai, which is a very important site. This town was only captured twice from Angolans by the SADF. During the fighting at Cuvelai, which lasted between December 1983 and January 1984, while Operation Askari was in progress, two battles are referred to as Cuvelai 1 and Cuvelai 2. The first battle of Cuvelai entailed an attack by 3 combat teams from Task Force Victor or Combat Group Delta, while the second took the form of an attack by a newly formed Task Force Victor, which comprised Combat Group Delta and elements of Task Force X-Ray. A larger component of Operation Askari was under the overall command of Brigadier Joop Joubert, the commander of Sector 10 in Namibia, South Africa, in Osikati, while Colonel Dick Lord commanded the Air Force contingent. The SADF strike forces consisted of 5,399 troops for the overall operation, which were divided into 4 main task forces: Task Force Echo Victor, under command of Colonel Eddie Viljoen; Task Force Fox, under command of Toby van Skalkwyk; Task Force Victor, which comprised mainly a citizen force element under Commandant Van Greiling; and Task Force X-Ray, initially under command of Commandant Gert van Zyl, subsequently under that of Commandant Ep van Lille, who was replaced by Commandant Welgemoed on 12 January 1984. In addition, a 5th force, Combat Group Delta Foxtrot, which was also referred to in its initial stages as a joint Sector 20 force, under the command of Colonel Dion Ferreira was made up of a company-strong combat group from Sector 20, including a company of 32 Battalion. During Cuvelai 1, Task Force Victor, which is also referred to as Combat Group Delta, was formed for the Battle of Cuvelai 1 under command of Commandant Van Greiling. The task force consisted of mainly citizen force soldiers from 82 Mechanized Battalion and the attached regular force from 61 Mechanized Battalion. 3 battalions of 11th Vapla Brigade were based at Cuvelai and supported by 1 battalion of soldiers from the Directorate of People's Defence and Territorial Force of OPD. The arsenal included 14 T-34-85 tanks, which were subsequently discovered to be the more advanced T-54-55s. The Higher Command of the SADF had decided on the previous day that the attack on Cuvelai would commence on 31st December from the northwest. The Higher Command had intended that the approach of the task force towards the target should drive the enemy force from their fixed locations and force them to flee from Cuvelai in a northerly direction. In addition, it was envisaged the task force would occupy a narrow bridge across the Cuvelai River to cut off the enemy supply lines. The first attack on Cuvelai was unsuccessful, and soon the task force was proceeding with a rapid withdrawal. Van Greiling was to assume command of the task force during Cuvelai 2. Combat Group Delta was augmented by a detachment from Task Force X-Ray from 61 Mechanized Battalion, which had participated in the fighting earlier at Kahama. The reorganized Combat Group Delta became known as Task Force Victor. In the early hours of 3 January 1984, the soldiers under Van Greiling formed up in their positions for the Battle of Cuvelai 2 at the position southeast of the town. By this stage, the SADF was desperate to achieve resounding success, which would counter the negative effect of the earlier reverses of the operation. At daybreak on 3 January 1984, the 2 main forces of the task force under Van Greiling moved together into the direction of Cuvelai to launch the attack. The plan was for the 1 force was to serve as a deviation force to attract the enemy's attention away from the main attacking force. But that did not go according to plan, as the deviation force remained in line with the main force, thereby not serving any purpose to confuse the enemy. The events took a dramatic turn when a Ratel 71 Bravo detonated a landmine. Though it had appeared to be making satisfactory progress, the Ratel came to a complete standstill in a minefield, where it remained in an ideal position to be destroyed by high caliber guns of advancing enemy tank. At the H hour of 800 hours on 4th January 1984, the final attack on 11th Brigade of Vapla at Cuvelai commenced, with any anti-aircraft guns firing on advancing SADF force. Heavily artillery bombardments by the SADF ground force and airstrikes by the Air Force on enemy positions immediately followed. A company of Vapla T-54-55 tanks unexpectedly initiated an attack on the Task Force Victor. The Task Force suffered a setback when the call sign 13 Bravo Ratel from 161 Mechanized Battalion, which served with Delta Company of Forsyth Infantry Battalion, was struck by the direct hit from a shell from a T-54-55 tank, killing 6 soldiers who were inside Ratel 13 Bravo. A final breakthrough was achieved at approximately 1700 hours when all enemy resistance had faded and enemy soldiers were fleeing in numbers. The task force took the town of Cuvelai and formed a protective laager inside it for the night. A total of 324 enemy soldiers were killed at Cuvelai. According to estimates by the SADF, the total enemy losses from the beginning to the end of Operation Askari amounted to 426 Vapla soldiers being killed and 3 being captured. Now 45 SWAPO soldiers were killed and 11 were captured, and 5 Cubans were called and 1 was captured. By contrast, the SADF losses throughout the entire operation amounted to 24 soldiers
who has been killed.
We lost people because we need to use the same guerrilla tactic.
Op Forte in 1984.
84, 85.
You moved through the bush like you were Anita.
Yeah.
You wear Anita clothes.
Anita, like swamp rock, everything. We were fighting and we lost people because the other side of South Africa was together with James in Ondjiva, and we need to go that side. And it was not support weapons, certificate support weapon. Whenever Casavec, you need to carry him more 10 or 20 kilometers away. For why we lose people and Casavec the people.
There was no support. You had to you had to live in the bush on your own.
Bush. And I tell you one state when you lost on February, we lost 11 people on Opscot.
Forte.
Yeah, for people need to carry these people 3 days. Some of them, the body was already rotten. Then we take a risk to open all the Portuguese airfield. And luckily, only the last at the end of the airfield was one anti-tank, anti-personnel man exploded, but corner for you. He take his balls and the pilot, he forced the pilot to come from Dakota there and to take those bodies and to take it out. It was not easy, understand?
So by 1981, it had become abundantly clear that SWAPO and FAPLA targets could not be separated, as SWAPO relied FAPLA's support lines to retrieve provisions and the FAPLA air defences for protection against the Southern African forces. A large-scale operation would be needed to neutralise the aerial and anti-aircraft capabilities of FAPLA at Lubango and destroy FAPLA forces and infrastructure at Xangongo and Ondjiva, and also a smaller force at Menogue. It's on the road between Xangongo and Ondjiva. For Phase 4, at least one mechanized and one motorized battle group was to be released from Xangongo to capture Ondjiva. On 27 August 1981, Combat Group 20 under command of Commandant Johan Dippies Dippenaar, which was a balanced composite unit, was for attack Ondjiva. The teams were to attack 3 specific targets which had been identified at Ondjiva. Combat Team 1 and 2 were to neutralize the FAPLA headquarters complex, while Combat Team 3 was to capture the airfield and 2 complexes during the course of advancing from north-northeastern direction. Soviet soldier, Warrant Officer 2nd Nikolai Fedorovich Petristov was captured. 4 other Soviet citizens were killed. 14 South African soldiers were killed during the carrying out of Operation Protea, while 61 were injured. By contrast, the combined figure of SWAPO, FAPLA and Soviet losses stood at 438 for that operation. The list of captured enemy equipment in the form of more than 200 vehicles of various types, and a lot was put to good use against FAPLA forces in the future operations. The South African forces captured from 3,000 to 4,000 tons of Soviet supply armaments during the course of carrying out Operation Protea, including 11 tanks, 3 BRM armored cars, 60 anti-aircraft guns, a number of artillery guns, and 200 trucks. Ondjiva remained occupied by the SADF until a temporary peace accord was implemented only 3 years later in 1984. I'm standing in the vicinity of Xangongo, just to the southwest. Now, Xangongo was a strategic town on the banks of the Kunene River, where a long bridge secured a crossing for the main road leading to the north. This is a very swampy area, and the bridge had to reach very far for vehicles to be able to travel over this area. Here, fierce fighting took place between the SADF and FAPLA. On D-Day, for the attack, which was codenamed Operation Protea by the task force, was 24 August 1981, when a brigade strength conventional force in the region of 5,000 SADF soldiers successfully captured Xangongo. Ratels equipped with 90mm guns played a direct and decisive role in countering the T-34-85 and T-54-55 tanks which the FAPLA forces had at their disposal. In Phase 3, a ground attack was to commence to capture Xangongo with 2 mechanized and 2 motorized battle groups, and to prevent an advance by FAPLA forces from north of the river by destroying that long bridge I mentioned before. Task Force Alpha was under the command of Colonel A.J.M. Hubert and comprised Combat Group 10 under the command of Commandant Roland de Vries, which in turn was comprised primarily of companies from 6th Mechanized Battalion. By contrast, the makeup of Combat Group 20 under the command of Commandant Johan Dippies Dippenaar was that of a balanced composite unit. Combat Group 30 consisted of a motorized unit which was commanded by Commandant Chris Swarthand Serfontein. A second motorized unit was accompanied by Alpha, Charlie and Golf companies from Frito Battalion. This group, to which 90 armoured cars were attached, was to form Combat Group 40 under the command of Commandant Dion Falcon Ferreira. Colonel Jan Carpenter Breitenbach travelled as an observer while Captain Royes Veldhuizen assumed command of a reaction force which comprised members of 44th Parachute Brigade and was known as the Pathfinders, which also joined Combat Group 40. Combat Groups 20, 30 and 40 were to cross the border east of the Kunene River and move to the road which runs between Xangongo and Ondjiva to attack Xangongo, probably from the southeast. The Rekkies demolished this 900-meter long bridge which spanned the Kunene River at Xangongo by blowing up all its pillars. The bridge fell neatly to the ground, and although it rested at a much lower height, it was enforced above the waterline and usable. After relatively minor repairs were made, it was restored for use during future operations.
I admire your fight. I admire your skills. and I admire your guts. You have done very well. I'm proud of you, and I say thank you.
And I am now going to ask everybody with rank, that is from Lance Corporal upwards, to stand up, turn around, and join me in 3 hurrahs, a tribute to the South African soldier.
Ons sal in Suid-Afrika en in Suid-Afrika ons moet staan en sterk maak om teen hierdie gedigte vyand van ons, naamlik die kommuniste, veral die Russiese ekspansionisme, te veg.
In die gebied was, sowel as vanaf luggeweer.
Forte in 1981 was a great challenge because there was 3 combat groups active, involved on one target. The challenge there again was to have detailed information about the target. It was not a task force, it was a combat group commander. And the same force that I used in Xangongo was the same one that was used in Ondjiva. I think it was a sort of improvement of the skeptic experience, because many lessons was learned through in skeptic. The force levels was changed, and also the equipment was revisited and upgraded. So Protea was a class of its own, and I reckon in history Protea will stand out as one of the major successes of semi-conventional and conventional war.
I'm broadcasting in the area which is west of the Cuvelai River, south of Kahama, where at the end of Angolan Border War, huge fighting took place at a place close to me called Techipa. By January 1988, 3,500 Cuban soldiers were being deployed in southwestern Angola, totally on the other side where the previous big fighting took place in southeastern Angola, thereby posing a threat to the SADF on a completely new front in the west. The initial SADF task force Zula was to be commanded by Colonel Miguel Delport, formerly the OC of Forte Battalion. A force from 6th Mechanized Battalion was mobilized to defend the Cuvelai Dam at all costs. 155 G5 Halzeter military groups crossed the bridge of Cuvelai on 16 June 1988.
I was appointed beginning of 1988 as the commander of 32 Battalion, and operations was done on the eastern side of Angola. Then the focus point moved more to the west, to the north of Sector 10, where Brigadier Zuidfontein was in charge. We had to be ready to prevent the Cubans, which were at that stage, one of the advanced elements was deployed in the Techipa area to move towards Hurricane, and if there were any threat to Namibia to prevent it. I deployed my forces north of the Kunene River, in 3-2 Battalion on the high ground north of Ruakan. We draw up a plan and decided on the 26th of June 1988 to attack them with artillery, to do a big bombardment. And it was one of the biggest bombardments of the war. There was G5 artillery, G2, multiple rocket launchers, 120mm mortars involved, and we attacked them on the Sunday night of the 26th of June. Very successful. We neutralized the command and control, the artillery, and such a matter that only the following day they could react and counter our attack, and they start looking for us. And that whole day we were busy with contacts with them. 6-1 Mech was involved with the Rifle 19s. Unfortunately, the tanks couldn't depart. They were too far back for this fight. The Cubans, not very happy for what happened the previous night, sent 6 MiGs with 450 kilogram bombs to bombard our forces in the Kalawek area. They threw us with 6 bombs, one at the bridge, one at the dam, one falling next to a buffel, and one next to a armored car, and one damaging the pipeline. They withdraw then to the north. They had some top covers also with them, and that was the main incident. Then that day also, after the attack, I was informed by Sector 10 Brigadier Serfontein that we have to break contact with the enemy. We are jeopardizing the peace process that was at that stage in process. I had to withdraw most of my forces south of the Kalawek scheme in the Rokana area, except for the 3-2 elements which were in defensive positions north of Rokana. We left them there. We had all our forces back that night.
A Ratel 90 was hit by a T-54-55 tank, which resulted in the death of Lieutenant Millie Meyring and the wounding 3 other soldiers. The wreckage is still inside Angola and could be visited. It's not far from where I now currently find myself, but more to the south. 20mm gun hit one of a returning MiGs, which on its way back had a crash landing.
And that was the last conventional stroke big fight against the Cubans and the enemy in the Bush War. After that, there was some incidents where Swapo was involved, but no conventional type of operations after that. That was actually, we could say, the end of the war.
This spelled the end of the war. As soon afterwards, a peace accord was signed. The parties reached agreement. Cuban forces left for Cuba, and the South Africans withdrew from the territory of Southwest Africa, Namibia, for the election to follow a UNTAC force to keep the peace, and the subsequent independence of Namibia after. So today we're heading to the end of this adventure and this story about the Angolan Border War. We're just north of the Kalawek Dam, where 1973-74 it properly all started. It started with the protection of the dam, the waterworks that takes water, very crucial water, to Ovambo land. And that's where we engaged a force of Venita first. And then at the end of the war, at Techipa, also in the same area, that's where the Cubans came down and the war was ended by an accord.
Right after the attack on Techipa by us, we started with this peace process. The Joint Monitoring Commission was established with Colonel Archie Moore, the chairman from our side, and they had frequent meetings at Kalawek with the Cuban forces, and it was almost a festive atmosphere when they gathered there together. There was exchanges of cigars and rat packs and the fish inside that, and they monitored all the incidents which happened after that until such stage that the war actually ended.
So this story consists of approximately 20 episodes, tells you a great deal of what this war is about. And I hope you enjoyed the adventure and sharing everything I learned.
I will wait in the morning if you call, and I'll stand beside you as long as I can. I will hold back the evening of your sun, but I won't crumble with you if you fall.
During the carrying out of Operation Askari in